That morning, Peter had no idea that in less than an hour he would discover a file someone inside the company was desperate to erase. A file that was never supposed to appear on the screen. A file with only one name on it: Sabrina. In downtown Chicago, there was a glass building just like dozens of others across the city. Every morning, hundreds of employees walked through its revolving doors carrying coffee cups, laptops, and quiet hopes for career growth. Among them was Sabrina. She always arrived earlier than most people, not because anyone asked her to, but because the early hours were the only time the office felt truly calm. The lights were still soft, the air conditioning hummed quietly, and the empty desks made the place feel peaceful. Before the rush and pressure of the day began, Sabrina liked that moment. She would place her bag beside her desk, turn on her computer, and start reviewing reports she had finished the night before. As the minutes passed, the office slowly came to life. Footsteps echoed through the hallway. The coffee machine started running. Small conversations filled the air. But strangely, none of those conversations ever included Sabrina. She had been working at Carter & Doyle Consulting for almost 3 years. Long enough to understand every system in the company, every internal process, and nearly every report circulating between departments. But apparently not long enough for people to remember her name. "Hey, can you send this to accounting?" a co-worker said one morning, dropping a file on her desk without even looking at her. Sabrina looked up politely. Of course. But the man had already walked away. Moments like that happened almost every day. It wasn't exactly cruelty. No one shouted at her. No one openly insulted her, but invisibility can be its own kind of loneliness. In meetings, people often talked over her. Sometimes Sabrina would start explaining an idea, only to be interrupted, just for someone else to repeat the exact same thought minutes later and receive approval from everyone in the room. She rarely argued. She would simply look back at her computer and continue working. Over time, it had become normal. At least, that's what she told herself. Across the office, someone was watching all of this in silence. Peter Lawson. Peter had joined the company only 4 months earlier. Unlike most employees who had been there for years, he still wasn't completely used to the quiet dynamics of the office. And maybe that was why he noticed something strange. Whenever he needed help understanding a complex report or finding missing data in the system, people kept telling him the same thing. "Ask Sabrina." The first time he heard that name, he was confused. "Who's Sabrina?" he asked. The room went silent for a moment. Then someone casually pointed toward the far side of the office. Her. Peter looked. A woman sat alone near the windows, focused on her computer screen, while the rest of the office moved around her. He watched as 3 co-workers walked past her desk without even noticing she was there. It felt strange. A few days later, Peter decided to ask her for help. He had been struggling to understand a financial model that looked incredibly complex. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but could you explain how these numbers were calculated?" Sabrina slowly turned her chair and studied the screen. Less than a minute later, she pointed to a specific column. "The error is here," she said calmly. "The formula is pulling data from the wrong quarter." Peter corrected the formula. The entire model started working again. He looked impressed. "How did you notice that so quickly?" Sabrina gave a small smile. "Because I built this model." Peter blinked. "You built it?" "Yes." That was the moment something started to feel strange to him. If Sabrina was that competent, why did nobody seem to notice? Over the next few days, Peter started paying closer attention. In meetings, Sabrina almost never spoke, and when she did, people ignored her. When she pointed out an error in a presentation, a manager interrupted her, 5 minutes later, that same manager repeated exactly what Sabrina had said, and everyone nodded in agreement. Sabrina simply lowered her eyes and continued taking notes. Peter felt a quiet discomfort watching it happen, but the moment that changed everything came on a Thursday morning. The conference room was full. An important project had collapsed overnight. Millions of dollars were at risk. Managers and analysts sat around the table while the department director, Richard Hale, stood near the screen. "We have a serious problem," he announced. A graph appeared on the projector, showing a dramatic drop in financial projections. "Someone made a critical mistake in the project model," murmurs spread through the room. Hale crossed his arms and looked around the table, then his eyes stopped on Sabrina. "You were responsible for the final report, weren't you?" Sabrina looked up, surprised. "Yes, but—" Hale raised his hand. "Then the error came from your department." Silence filled the room. Peter felt his stomach tighten. Sabrina quickly opened a folder. "There must be a misunderstanding," she said calmly. "The numbers were verified yesterday." Hale's voice turned colder. "Well, they're not correct now." He looked at the other managers. This kind of negligence could cost the company a very important client. People shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, but no one defended her. No one asked questions. The conclusion had already formed in everyone's minds. Sabrina had made the mistake. Peter watched carefully. Instead of arguing, Sabrina lowered her gaze. "I'll review everything immediately," she said. The meeting ended a few minutes later. People left the room whispering. Peter remained seated for a moment. Something about the situation felt wrong. Not just unfair, wrong, because 2 days earlier he had reviewed part of that same financial model, and Sabrina's calculations had been perfect. He returned to his desk and opened his computer. If there really had been an error, the system would show when the data had been modified. At least, it should. He opened the project folder. All the files were there. But then something strange happened. For a brief moment, another file appeared in the list. Confidential archive. Peter frowned before he could click it. The file disappeared. He refreshed the page. Nothing. Only the normal project documents remained. Peter stared at the screen. Then he noticed a small notification in the corner of the system. File scheduled for permanent deletion. His heart started beating faster. Someone was trying to erase something, and whatever it was connected to Sabrina. Peter slowly looked across the office. Sabrina was still working quietly, focused on her reports, while the rest of the office continued its normal routine. She looked exactly the same as always, invisible. But for the first time since he joined that company, Peter had the strange feeling that the quietest person in the room might be at the center of the biggest secret of all. And he had just seen the first clue. Peter kept staring at the computer screen for several seconds. The notification was still there, file scheduled for permanent deletion. It didn't make sense. Corporate files didn't just disappear, especially not files marked as confidential. Enterprise systems had layers of security, access logs, permissions. For a file to be permanently deleted, someone had to authorize it, someone with high-level access. Peter looked at the project folder again. Nothing. No sign of the file that had appeared just seconds earlier. He refreshed the page again. Still nothing. For a moment he wondered if he had imagined it, but no, he knew exactly what he had seen. Confidential archive. And somehow, that file was connected to Sabrina's name. Peter slowly closed his laptop and looked up. Across the office, Sabrina was still working. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard while she reviewed a report. Her expression was calm and focused, as if nothing unusual had happened that morning. As if she hadn't just been accused of making a mistake that could cost the company millions. Peter watched her for a moment. Something about it didn't add up. If someone had been blamed unfairly in a meeting like that, the normal reaction would be anger, frustration, nervousness, but Sabrina seemed resigned, or maybe just used to it. Peter opened his laptop again. If the file had been scheduled for deletion, there had to be some record left in the system. He opened the internal server history. The system took a few seconds to load. Then a long list of records appeared: spreadsheet updates, report modifications, file downloads. Everything looked normal. Peter slowly scrolled down the page. Then he stopped. There it was. A single record. Confidential archive. Access attempt detected. He frowned. Access attempt. That meant the system had detected an attempt to open the file, but it didn't show who had tried. That was strange. Normally every access was logged with the user's name. Peter clicked the record. A small window opened with more details. File status, scheduled for deletion. Authorized by... The field was empty. Peter leaned back in his chair. Now that was definitely strange. Corporate systems didn't leave authorization fields blank. Someone had hidden the record, or deleted part of it. Peter glanced discreetly around the office. No one seemed to be paying attention to him. Employees were chatting, typing, walking between desks like any normal day. But now Peter had the uneasy feeling that something was happening beneath that routine. Something no one was seeing. Or maybe something no one wanted to see. He looked back at the system log. Then he tried to open the full history of the file. The screen flickered. Access denied. Peter frowned. He had permission to access almost every report in the department. But that file seemed to be protected by a different level of security, something above his clearance. He tried again. Access denied. Peter exhaled slowly. If someone was trying to erase that file, there were only two possibilities. Either it was something extremely confidential to the company, or it was something that was never supposed to be discovered. He slowly closed the system. Then he looked back at Sabrina. She was still working, calm, quiet, invisible. But now Peter was certain of one thing. This story hadn't started in that meeting. This had been happening for a long time. Hours later, when most employees were already leaving the office, Peter was still there. The lights on the floor were dimmer now. Some desks were empty. Others still had people finishing reports before heading home. Sabrina was still there, as always. She was almost always one of the last to leave. Peter watched as she saved a few files and organized documents into a folder. Then something caught his attention. A system window briefly appeared on her screen. Sabrina typed something quickly. The window disappeared. Peter couldn't see what it was, but he recognized the interface. It was the same internal server system. He frowned. Why would Sabrina be accessing that, especially after being accused in that morning's meeting? A few minutes later, Sabrina shut down her computer. She picked up her bag and walked toward the elevator. Peter hesitated for a moment. Then he made a decision. He saved the files he had been reviewing and closed his laptop. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it meant nothing. But one thing was clear. The file someone had tried to delete was connected to Sabrina's name. And if something was hidden in that system, Peter needed to find it before it disappeared forever. He stood up and walked down the hallway. The elevator was still open. Sabrina stepped inside. Peter stepped in right behind her. The elevator began descending in silence. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Sabrina said, "You stayed late today." Peter looked at her, surprised. "Yeah, I still had a few things to finish." Sabrina nodded slightly. "This job tends to do that to people." There was a brief silence. Then Peter asked, "About the meeting earlier?" Sabrina gently interrupted him. "Don't worry about that." Peter looked confused. "What do you mean?" She gave a small smile. "Some stories inside companies are older than they seem." Peter frowned. "What do you mean by that?" The elevator doors opened in the lobby. Sabrina stepped out first. Before leaving, she turned back for a moment. "Sometimes," she said calmly, "the truth is already in the system. People just don't know where to look." Then she walked out of the building. Peter stood in the lobby for a few seconds, because at that moment he realized something. Sabrina knew. She knew something was hidden. And maybe she knew far more than she was saying. The next morning, Peter arrived at the office earlier than usual. The city was still waking up when he entered the glass building of Carter and Doyle Consulting. The lights on the floor were only partially on, and silence filled the open office space. He walked to his desk, placed his laptop on the table and turned it on. For a few seconds, he just stared at the home screen. The conversation in the elevator the night before was still echoing in his mind. Sometimes the truth is already in the system. Sabrina had said it too calmly, as if she knew exactly what he was looking for, or worse, as if she knew he would eventually start looking. Peter opened the company's internal system. He typed the name of the project that had failed during the meeting. The same files appeared: spreadsheets, reports, financial projections. Everything looked normal. But now he wasn't searching for errors in the model. He was looking for something else. He opened the full history of the project. The system took a few seconds to load. Then a long list of modifications appeared on the screen. Changes made by different departments, data updates, value corrections. Peter slowly scrolled through the list. Then suddenly something caught his attention. An entry that was very old, almost 3 years old. Project Foundation file created. He clicked on it. A new folder appeared. Inside it, there was only one file. Foundation Model V1. Peter opened it. The spreadsheet took a few seconds to fully load. When it finally appeared on the screen, he went silent. The model was extremely complex, more complex than any version currently used by the company. It looked like someone had built the entire financial structure of the project right there. Peter looked at the top corner of the document and saw a field that made his heart race. Created by Sabrina Alvarez. Peter froze. Then he opened another system record. Foundation model approved by Richard Hale. Peter frowned. Richard Hale, the same director who had accused Sabrina in the meeting. Peter continued analyzing the file. The longer he studied the spreadsheet, the more he realized something important. The current version of the project, the one that had supposedly failed, was almost an exact copy of that original model. Same structure, same formulas, same financial logic. But there was one difference: the author's name. In the newer versions, the creator of the model appeared as Richard Hale. Peter slowly leaned back in his chair. Now things were starting to make sense. If Sabrina had created the original model, someone had replaced her name, someone had taken the credit, and if that project had truly saved the company years ago, it explained why Hale had eventually become director. Peter went back to the system history. Something still bothered him. He searched for other modifications made to the original file. That's when he found another entry. Foundation Model V1, author field modified modification date, 2 years and 11 months ago. Peter opened the details. Author field changed original value. Sabrina Alvarez, new value. Richard Hale. A cold chill ran down Peter's spine. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a direct change inside the system records, and someone had tried to hide it. Peter checked the user responsible for the modification, but the field was empty. just like the record of the file that had disappeared. He took a slow breath. Now, two things were clear. First, Sabrina had created the project that became the foundation of the entire company. Second, someone had altered the records to erase her name. Peter slowly closed the spreadsheet. Then he noticed something new. At the bottom corner of the screen, another folder was hidden inside the same directory. Archive Logs. He clicked it. The folder opened. Inside were dozens of old records, access logs, modification histories. Peter opened one, then another, then another. Each one revealed small changes made over the years, fields edited, authors modified, dates adjusted. It was as if someone had been slowly rewriting the history of that project, changing records little by little, just enough so that no one would notice, until Sabrina's name finally disappeared completely. Peter closed his eyes for a moment. Now, a different question came to his mind. If all of this was true, why had Sabrina never said anything? He looked at the clock. It was only 7:20 in the morning. Very few employees had arrived yet. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Peter turned his head. Sabrina was entering the office, as always, early. She walked calmly to her desk, placed her bag on the chair, and turned on her computer. For a moment, their eyes met. She gave him a polite smile. "Good morning," Peter answered automatically. "Good morning." But now something felt different. He knew. He knew that quiet woman had created something huge, something someone else had stolen, and for some reason, she had allowed it to happen. Peter looked back at his computer screen. But before he could close the system, a new notification appeared, a small alert, System Alert Archive. Logs accessed. Peter froze, because that meant only one thing. Someone else had seen the access he had just made. And now, that person knew he was investigating. Peter stared at the notification on the screen. System Alert Archive Logs accessed. His first instinct was to close everything. He quickly moved the cursor and shut down the company's internal system. The screen returned to the desktop, but his heart was still beating faster than it should. That meant someone was monitoring the server access. And now that person knew he had opened old files. Files that someone had clearly tried to hide. Peter took a slow breath and discreetly looked around the office. Some employees were beginning to arrive. Conversations started near the coffee machine. The environment looked completely normal. But now Peter had the uneasy feeling that something was happening behind that quiet routine. He looked up. Sabrina was sitting at her desk, typing calmly. As always, Peter watched her for a few seconds. If she had created that project, if her name had been erased, then why was she still working there as if nothing had happened? The question kept echoing in his mind. After a few minutes, Peter made a decision. He stood up from his chair and walked towards Sabrina's desk. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" She looked up. Her expression was calm. "Of course." Peter glanced quickly around the office. "Maybe somewhere more private." Sabrina studied his face for a moment. Then she closed her laptop. "Let's use the smaller meeting room." The two walked in silence to a small glass room at the back of the floor. Sabrina closed the door. "What happened?" Peter placed his hands on the table. "I was looking at the system records." For a brief moment, something almost invisible crossed her expression, but it disappeared quickly. "And?" Peter kept his eyes fixed on her. "I found the original model file for the project." Silence. Sabrina said nothing. Peter continued. "It was created by you." She remained quiet. Then she asked calmly, "You accessed the files from 3 years ago?" "Yes." "And the modification logs too?" Peter looked surprised. Yes. Sabrina slowly crossed her arms. Then you already know. Peter frowned. Know what? She looked directly at him. That the project was altered. I know they changed the author's name. Not just that. Peter said nothing. Sabrina walked toward the window of the meeting room. For a few seconds, she watched the city moving below. That project saved the company 3 years ago, she said. Peter had already suspected that, and Hale took the credit. Sabrina nodded slightly. Yes. Peter felt a wave of anger rising inside him. Then why didn't you say anything? She slowly turned her head toward him. Because saying something wouldn't change anything. What do you mean? Sabrina looked back at him. Richard Hale didn't change those records alone. A cold chill ran down Peter's spine. What do you mean by that? Sabrina took a deep breath. The company's system has 3 levels of authorization to modify historical records. Peter already knew that. Department Director. Yes. Executive Director. Yes. And Central Server Administration. Sabrina nodded. Exactly. Peter took a second to understand. Then the reality hit him like a weight. You're saying someone else approved it. Not just approved, she paused, authorized it. Peter fell silent. That meant the problem was much bigger than a single director manipulating records. It meant someone in the company's leadership structure had participated, or at least looked the other way. Peter ran a hand through his hair. And you just let it happen? Sabrina answered with a calmness that was almost unsettling. No. Peter looked up. No. She stepped closer to the table again. I waited. Waited for what? For someone to finally notice. Peter frowned. Notice what? Sabrina opened the laptop she had brought with her. She typed quickly, then turned the screen toward him. It was the company's internal system, but not the normal interface. This one was deeper, full of technical logs, server records, backup files. Peter's eyes widened. How do you have access to this? Sabrina answered with the same calm tone. Because I helped build this system too. Peter froze. She continued. When they changed the records to remove my name, they thought they were erasing history. She pointed to a specific folder on the screen, but they forgot one thing. Peter looked at the folder. Backup archive, mirror server. Corporate systems make automatic copies. She opened a file. Inside were complete records. Original author, creation date, modification history, everything intact. Evidence that could never be erased. Peter looked at her, stunned. You kept all of this? Yes. For 3 years. Sabrina nodded. 3 years. Peter was still processing everything. Then he realized something. If you have all this proof, why didn't you use it? Sabrina slowly closed the laptop. Because sometimes the truth needs to appear at the right moment. Peter frowned. And when is that moment? Sabrina answered calmly. When someone starts digging into files that were supposed to stay forgotten. Peter understood immediately. The system alert. Someone knew he had accessed the files. And now, that person was probably trying to find out what he had discovered. Peter opened his mouth to say something. But at that exact moment, the door of the meeting room opened. A man from the IT department appeared. Peter! He turned. Yes? The man looked slightly nervous. Director Hale wants to see you. Peter felt his stomach tighten. Now. Now. Peter looked at Sabrina. She didn't seem surprised. She simply said calmly, I imagine he wants to know what you found. Peter felt a chill run through him. Because at that moment he realized something. Someone in the system had seen the alert. Someone had warned Hale. And now, The director knew Peter was investigating. Peter left the meeting room with his heart racing. The IT employee was already walking a few steps ahead of him down the hallway. "The director is waiting," he said without turning around. Peter nodded, but his mind was far away. If Hale really knew he had accessed those files, this wouldn't be a simple conversation. It would be an interrogation. They walked down the main corridor until they reached the administrative wing, where the director's offices were located. Unlike the rest of the floor, that area was quiet and almost always empty. The IT employee stopped in front of a dark wooden door. "You can go in." Peter took a deep breath and knocked twice. "Come in." Richard Hale's voice came from inside the office. Peter opened the door. The office was spacious, with a large window overlooking the entire city. Hale was sitting behind his desk, his hands resting on a few documents. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked curious. "Peter," he said, "have a seat." Peter sat in the chair across from the desk. Hale studied him for a few seconds before speaking again. "I heard you spent part of the morning accessing old files from the server." Peter kept his expression neutral. "I was reviewing records from the project that failed." Hale tilted his head slightly. "Records from 3 years ago?" Silence. Peter realized there was no point denying it. "Yes." Hale leaned back in his chair. "You're a competent analyst, Peter. That's why I'll give you a piece of advice." He interlocked his fingers. "Some things inside a company simply belong in the past." Peter answered calmly. "And some things belong to the truth." For a brief moment, Hale's expression changed, but it quickly returned to normal. "The truth," Hale said, "is an interesting concept in the corporate world." Peter rested his hands on the arms of the chair. "Especially when someone changes records to rewrite who created a project." The silence in the room became heavy. Hale slowly stood up. He walked toward the window. "Did Sabrina tell you?" Peter replied, "I found the files." Hale let out a small sigh. "I figured." He turned back around. "You're smart enough to understand that some decisions are strategic." Peter frowned. "Stealing someone's work is strategic." Hale shrugged. "The project needed leadership. The company needed someone to represent it. And Sabrina wasn't good enough?" "Sabrina was technically excellent," Hale replied. "But companies aren't run only by the people who do the work." Peter felt his irritation growing. "So you decided to erase her name?" Hale walked back toward the desk. "I decided to protect the company." Peter stood up. "No, you decided to protect yourself." Hale watched him for a few seconds. "You really think you can change anything now?" Peter remained silent. Then he answered calmly. "No." Hale raised an eyebrow. "No." Peter pulled his phone from his pocket. "Not me." He tapped the screen. The office door opened again. Sabrina walked in. Behind her came 2 other people. One was the company's executive director. The other was the head of the legal department. Hale froze. The executive director spoke first. "Richard, it looks like we have a lot to discuss." Peter stepped aside as Sabrina walked toward the desk. She placed her laptop on the surface, then opened the backup file. All the records appeared on the screen. Original author, modification dates, complete history, evidence that could not be denied. The executive director studied the documents in silence. Then he looked at Hale. "Do you have any explanation for this?" Hale said nothing. For the first time since Peter had known him, he seemed completely speechless. A few minutes later, 2 members of corporate security entered the office. Hale was asked to accompany them. No resistance, no speeches, just silence. When the door finally closed, the executive director turned to Sabrina. "I'm sorry for everything that happened." Sabrina replied with the same calm tone she always had. "I just wanted the truth to exist." He nodded. "And now it does." Later that day, the entire office already knew what had happened. For the first time in 3 years, Sabrina's name appeared in the company's official reports as the creator of the project that had saved the company. Some people looked surprised, others looked uncomfortable, many simply didn't know what to say. But Sabrina didn't seem interested in recognition. At the end of the afternoon, she shut down her computer like she did every day. Peter found her near the elevator. "So, it's over?" Sabrina gave a small smile. "Some stories take longer to end." The elevator arrived. Before stepping inside, Peter asked one last question. "Did you know this would happen?" She thought for a moment. Then she answered, "I knew that sooner or later, someone would look in the right place." The elevator doors closed, and in that moment, Peter finally understood something. For 3 years, Sabrina had never been invisible.